The antique shop was a labyrinth of forgotten objects. Dusty shelves bowed under the weight of history, each item whispering a story I would never fully know. The air smelled of aged wood and mothballs, but there was something else, something metallic, like the edge of a storm. I had wandered into the shop out of boredom. The drizzle outside had turned the streets into mirrors, and I had nowhere to be. The bell above the door tinkled faintly as I entered, its sound quickly swallowed by the heavy silence. The shopkeeper, a gaunt man with watery eyes, barely looked up from the leather-bound book he was thumbing through. His muttered greeting was more a formality than an invitation. I browsed aimlessly until my fingers brushed against it, a small, rectangular recorder, worn but intact. Its black casing was scratched, and the buttons looked stiff from disuse. The brand was unfamiliar, its name faded to an indistinct smudge. Interested in that? The shopkeeper croaked, his voice startling me. Maybe, I replied, holding it up. Does it work? He smirked, a thin, grim curve of lips. Depends on what you're trying to hear. What's that supposed to mean? Old thing like that, he said, closing his book and leaning on the counter. Some say it's got a knack for picking up unusual sounds. Whispers, mostly. Whispers. From spirits. Or so the story goes. If you believe in that sort of thing. I laughed nervously, half expecting him to chuckle along. He didn't. Instead, his gaze lingered on me, his expression inscrutable. How much? I asked, breaking the silence. He named a price that was low enough to make me suspicious, but I handed him the cash anyway. The recorder was placed in a paper bag, and as I left the shop, I felt the weight of his eyes following me. At home, I placed the recorder on my desk. My apartment was quiet, too quiet. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards felt oppressive. I stared at the device, its dull surface seeming to absorb the light. Curiosity got the better of me. I pressed the play button. At first, there was nothing but static, a hiss that filled the room like the sound of waves crashing on a distant shore. Then, faintly, came the whispers. At first, I couldn't make out any words, just a low murmur. But as I strained to listen, certain phrases stood out, chilling in their clarity. Not much time. She doesn't know yet. It's coming for her. My breath caught in my throat. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving only the static behind. My skin prickled, and I slammed the recorder down. I told myself it was a trick, some leftover recording from the previous owner. That had to be it. And yet, a small, insistent voice in the back of my mind whispered otherwise. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next day, I tried it again. This time, I pressed the record button, letting the tape run as I spoke aloud. Is anyone there? If you can hear me, say something. When I played it back, my voice echoed, calm but hesitant. A long silence followed. Then, just as I was about to turn it off, a single word emerged from the static. Run. The word echoed in my mind, refusing to fade. Something about the way it had been spoken, soft yet urgent, unnerved me. I decided to do some research, digging through forums and obscure articles about supernatural phenomena. Stories of cursed objects, haunted recordings, and devices that picked up otherworldly transmissions were surprisingly common. But nothing explained the voices I'd heard. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I recorded again. This time, the whispers were louder, more coherent. It's close now. She'll see soon. And then, a voice I recognized. My own. Help me. I froze, staring at the recorder in disbelief. The voice was unmistakably mine, but warped, strained, as if spoken through gritted teeth or a mouth filled with gravel. Help me. The static swallowed the words, and I slammed the stop button. My heart hammered in my chest as my mind raced to rationalize what I'd heard. A prank. That had to be it. Maybe the shopkeeper had planted something on the recorder, a pre-recorded message to scare gullible buyers. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than an elaborate hoax. But deep down, I knew. The voice hadn't just sounded like me. It was me. That night, I tucked the recorder into a drawer and tried to forget it. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the apartment, every groan of the pipes made me jump. The shadows seemed darker, more oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. At around 3 a.m., the whispers started. They didn't come from the recorder this time. They came from everywhere. A soft, sibilant chorus filled the room, surrounding me like a cold embrace. I couldn't make out the words, but their intent was clear, malicious, probing, invasive. I buried my head under the covers, squeezing my eyes shut, but the whispers grew louder, closer. Run. My eyes flew open. The whispers stopped. The room was silent again, save for my ragged breathing. I sat up, trembling, and turned on every light in the apartment. The recorder was still in the drawer where I'd left it, but I could feel its presence, like a dark weight pressing on my mind. The next morning, I called the antique shop. Antiques and oddities, the shopkeeper's gravelly voice answered. "This is the woman who bought the recorder yesterday," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to know more about it. Where did it come from?" He was silent for a moment before replying. "Don't know much. Got it from an estate sale a few months back. Belonged to a collector. Bit of an eccentric, I heard. Did anything unusual happen with it before?" A dry chuckle crackled through the line. "You could say that. The guy who owned it, he wasn't exactly well. Started hearing things. Talking to the recorder like it was alive. They found him dead, you know." My stomach twisted. "How?" "Heart attack, supposedly. But he had this look on his face." The shopkeeper trailed off, as if the memory was too much. "What kind of look?" I pressed. "Like he'd seen something he couldn't handle. Something that broke him." I hung up, my hands shaking. Every instinct screamed at me to get rid of the recorder, but a part of me, some morbid, insistent curiosity, kept me from doing it. That evening, as the sky turned a bruised shade of purple, I sat at my desk with the recorder in front of me. Its buttons gleamed faintly in the dim light, like eyes watching me. I pressed record. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence was deafening. The tape whirred softly as it captured the empty room. I waited, heart pounding, until I could bear it no longer. When I pressed play, the static roared back at me, louder than before. Then, a voice spoke. Closer. My blood ran cold. "What do you want from me?" I asked the empty room, half expecting an answer to materialize from the shadows. The tape continued, the static weaving around the voice like smoke. "It's watching." "What's watching?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "You'll see." The recorder clicked off on its own. I stared at it, horrified, as the lights in my apartment flickered. A shadow moved in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, nothing was there. By midnight, the whispers had returned. They were louder this time, distinct and purposeful. "Time is running out. She has to know." "Know what?" And then, through the cacophony, my own voice broke through again. "Don't turn around." Every muscle in my body locked. My breath hitched, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of someone standing behind me. Slowly, I turned. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop. My apartment was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a lamp on my desk. Shadows stretched and danced across the walls, and for a moment, I saw nothing. Then I noticed it, a figure in the corner. It wasn't fully formed, more a silhouette than a person, but it had a presence that made my skin crawl. Its outlines seemed to shimmer, as if it were caught between this world and somewhere else. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. It simply stood, watching me with a stillness that felt unnatural. Then, the whispers started again. Closer. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the chair. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my legs felt weak. "No," I muttered. "You're not real." The figure tilted its head, as though considering my words. Then, slowly, it began to move. It didn't walk, it glided, soundlessly, across the floor toward me. Its edges blurred, like smoke caught in a draft. I backed up until I hit the wall, my chest heaving with panicked breaths. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of voices that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the apartment. "It's coming. You have to listen. No escape." The figure stopped inches away from me. I could feel the cold radiating off it, a chill that seeped into my bones. It raised an arm, pointing toward the desk where the recorder sat. "What do you want from me?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. The whispers abruptly ceased, leaving a silence so profound it rang in my ears. The figure slowly lowered its arm and dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone in the suffocating quiet. For the next hour, I sat motionless on the floor, staring at the recorder. My mind raced, torn between terror and an overwhelming urge to understand what was happening. Finally, I gathered the courage to press play. The static was softer this time, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. A single voice emerged, clearer than any I'd heard before. "Do you know what you've done?" I recoiled. The voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was an edge to it, a menace beneath the surface. "What do you mean?" I whispered, as if the recorder could hear me. The static pulsed, then the voice returned. "You opened the door." "What door?" The recorder clicked off, leaving my question hanging in the air. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and paranoia. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified and menacing. I sat with the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife like it would somehow protect me. When dawn finally broke, I decided I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. I shoved the recorder into my bag and left, determined to get rid of it. The antique shop was closed when I arrived. I banged on the door, shouting for the shopkeeper, but no one answered. Frustrated, I turned to leave, and froze. Through the dusty glass of the shop window, I saw the recorder sitting on the counter, even though I still had it in my bag. I stumbled back, heart racing. Was I losing my mind? I yanked the recorder from my bag and stared at it, half expecting it to vanish in my hands. It didn't. The shop door creaked open behind me. I spun around to find the shopkeeper standing there, his expression grim. "You shouldn't have brought it back," he said. "I don't want it anymore." I shouted, holding it out to him. "Take it." He shook his head. "It's yours now. You can't just pass it off." "What are you talking about? What is this thing?" The shopkeeper's gaze darkened. "It's a collector," he said quietly. "It records whispers, secrets, warnings, the last words of those who are about to die. But once you use it, it binds itself to you. Why didn't you tell me that before? Would you have believed me?" I staggered out of the shop, the recorder feeling heavier in my hands. The shopkeeper's words echoed in my mind, "It binds itself to you." As I walked down the empty street, the whispers began again, louder and more insistent than ever. "So little time. The door is open. It's coming for her." Then, as if in response to my rising panic, my own voice broke through once more. "Run." The whispers followed me home like a curse. They clung to the air, weaving through the hum of passing cars and the rustling leaves in the wind. My own voice, trapped in that cacophony, echoed in my mind. Run. But where could I go? The weight of the recorder in my bag felt like an anchor, pulling me deeper into a storm I couldn't escape. I wanted to throw it into the nearest river, watch it sink into the depths, but something stopped me, fear, or maybe fascination. I made it back to my apartment just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. The silence that greeted me inside was deafening, heavier than before. For hours, I sat on the couch, staring at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. Its buttons gleamed faintly in the dim light, taunting me with their simplicity. All it would take was one press, and I'd hear the truth, or another lie. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting me out of my daze. It was Sarah, my best friend. "Hey, you okay? You sounded weird the other day," her voice crackled through the speaker. I hesitated. How could I explain what was happening without sounding insane? "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. "You don't sound fine." Her concern was genuine, but it only made the knot in my stomach tighten. "Do you want me to come over?" "No." I blurted, too quickly. The last thing I wanted was to drag her into this mess. "I'm just tired. I'll be fine." She didn't sound convinced, but she let it go. "Okay. Call me if you need anything, alright?" "Sure." I hung up, feeling the weight of my isolation settle over me like a shroud. I was alone with this thing, and it wasn't going to let me go. By midnight, the whispers returned. This time, they weren't just in the recorder, they were everywhere. The walls seemed to breathe with them, the floor pulsed under my feet, and the shadows stretched unnaturally long. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it was useless. "She doesn't understand. It's too late. Run, run, run." I snapped. Grabbing the recorder, I slammed it onto the desk and pressed the record button. "What do you want from me?" I screamed. The whispers stopped instantly, leaving an oppressive silence. My chest heaved as I stared at the device, waiting for a response. When I pressed play, the static hissed like a living thing. Then the voice spoke, calm, deliberate, and unmistakably mine. "You opened the door. Now you must close it." "What door?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The recorder fell silent. No static, no whispers, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. The recorder's words echoed in my mind, gnawing at me. "You opened the door. Now you must close it." What door? How had I opened it? As dawn broke, I realized I needed answers. If the shopkeeper wouldn't help me, I'd have to find them myself. I spent the next day scouring the internet for anything that might explain what was happening. Stories of cursed objects, haunted recorders, and shadowy figures abounded, but none of them felt specific enough. Then I found it, a blog buried in the depths of an old paranormal forum. The author, someone calling themselves Seeker, described an encounter eerily similar to mine. According to the blog, the recorder wasn't just a device, it was a gateway. It didn't just capture voices, it lured them, trapped them, and in doing so, opened a passage between worlds. But there was more. The recorder, the blog claimed, was a collector. It fed on whispers, the last words, warnings, and regrets of those it touched. And once it chose someone, it wouldn't stop until it had collected everything. At the bottom of the page, there was a single line that sent a chill down my spine. "If you hear your own voice, it's already too late." I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. Was I doomed? Could I still stop whatever was happening? The blog didn't say how to close the door. It only warned that failing to do so meant something would come through. That night, the whispers grew louder than ever. The air in the apartment felt thick, heavy, like a storm was building inside the walls. I tried to block it out, to focus, but then I heard something new. A knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, precise and deliberate. I froze. No one came to my apartment unannounced, especially not this late. The knock came again, louder this time. Slowly, I rose from the couch and crept toward the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But as I stepped back, the whispers surged, deafening in their intensity. Don't let it in. Too late. It's here. My gaze snapped to the recorder, and to my horror, the play button was pressed down. I hadn't touched it. The static poured from the speaker, thick and oppressive. Then, through the hiss, came the sound of heavy breathing, deep, ragged, and inhuman. A new voice spoke, one I didn't recognize. I'm coming. The recorder clicked off, and the apartment plunged into silence. I didn't know what to do. Panic clawed at my chest as I grabbed my bag and threw the recorder inside. I couldn't stay here. I needed to go somewhere, anywhere, but as I opened the door, I stopped cold. The hallway wasn't empty anymore. A figure stood at the far end, shrouded in darkness. It didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me. The whispers started again, louder than ever, their words overlapping in a torrent of sound. Run. It's too late. Don't look away. The figure took a step forward. The figure took another step forward, its movements impossibly smooth, as though it glided over the floor. My breath hitched, and I stumbled back into the apartment, slamming the door shut with trembling hands. The whispers were deafening now, their chaotic voices overlapping in a sinister chant. It's here. You let it in. Run, run, run. The pounding on the door started a moment later. It wasn't frantic or panicked but slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the chase. Each thud reverberated through the apartment, rattling the walls and shaking the air in my lungs. I backed away, clutching the recorder like a lifeline. My mind screamed at me to run, to flee down the fire escape or out the back door, but some instinct held me in place. Whatever this thing was, it felt like there was no escaping it. The pounding stopped. For a moment, there was silence, thick and suffocating. I held my breath, straining to listen, when I heard it. The voice came from the recorder. Open the door. It wasn't my voice this time. It was low and guttural, barely human, and it chilled me to the core. No, I whispered, shaking my head. The recorder clicked on again, the static roaring to life. Over the hiss, the voice spoke once more, dripping with malice. You can't hide. I dropped the recorder like it had burned me. It hit the floor with a dull thud but continued playing. The whispers surged, louder and more insistent than ever, but underneath them, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and coming closer. I backed into the corner of the room, my eyes darting around for anything I could use as a weapon. The kitchen knife I'd grabbed earlier lay on the counter, just out of reach. The footsteps stopped outside the door. I stared, paralyzed, as the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, it twisted, the mechanism clicking like the ticking of a clock. And then, it stopped. The door didn't open. Instead, the whispers faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that made my ears ring. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then, I noticed the shadows. They stretched unnaturally across the walls and floor, growing longer and darker until they seemed to converge in the center of the room. I watched, horrified, as they began to take shape, first an outline, then a form. It was the figure. It stood there, silent and still, its face obscured by darkness. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath puffing out in shallow gasps. What do you want? I managed to choke out. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised an arm, pointing directly at the recorder lying on the floor. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm not playing it again. The figure took a step closer. The room seemed to darken, the walls pressing in as the temperature plummeted. My body trembled violently, but I didn't move. You opened the door, the voice from the recorder said, crackling with static. Now you must close it. How? I screamed, tears streaming down my face. How do I close it? The figure didn't respond, but the recorder did. Listen. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. The whispers returned as soon as I pressed play, their words clearer than before. The gateway. The price must be paid. It wants a voice. I stared at the recorder, my heart sinking as understanding dawned. The figure wanted something. It had been collecting whispers, gathering voices, but not just any voices. It needed something specific. Something personal. And now, it wanted mine. The shadows pressed closer, the figure looming over me. Its presence was suffocating, and I could feel its gaze boring into me, though it had no visible eyes. My hand hovered over the recorder, trembling as I considered what to do. If I gave it my voice, would it leave? Or would it take something more, my life, my soul? The recorder hissed, as if urging me on. The whispers grew frantic, their words blending into a single command. Speak. With a shaking hand, I pressed the record button. The red light blinked on, and the static surged. I'm here, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the noise. The figure froze. The static crackled, louder and sharper, and the air grew unbearably cold. What do you want? I asked again, my voice trembling. The recorder hissed and sputtered before finally responding, its words slow and deliberate. Your silence. I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. It didn't just want my voice, it wanted me to stop asking, stop resisting. To surrender completely. No, I said, my voice firmer this time. I won't give you that. The figure recoiled slightly, as if my defiance had surprised it. The shadows wavered, their grip on the room loosening. The recorder's static grew louder, almost frantic, but I could sense the figure weakening. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stood and faced it. You can't have me, I said. Get out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the figure began to dissolve, its form unraveling like smoke in the wind. The shadows retreated, the whispers fading into silence. The recorder clicked off. I stared at the device for what felt like hours, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the room remained still, the oppressive weight finally lifting. I didn't know if it was truly over, but I did know one thing. The recorder was more than an object. It was a collector, a gateway, a curse. And it wasn't done with me yet. For days, my apartment felt wrong, too quiet, too still. The recorder sat untouched on my desk, a black void in the periphery of my vision. I didn't dare touch it, not after what had happened. But its presence was unavoidable. It felt alive, as if it was watching, waiting. The whispers were gone for now, but the silence felt worse. It pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, and I knew the respite was temporary. The next event came on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, when the sound began. At first, it was faint, a soft clicking, like nails tapping against a glass pane. I froze, the spoon slipping from my hand. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was coming from the living room. From the recorder. No, I whispered, shaking my head. Not again. The clicking stopped abruptly, replaced by a familiar hiss. Static. My heart raced as I edged toward the living room, each step a battle against the rising tide of panic. When I reached the recorder, it was already playing. You must finish. The voice was soft but unmistakable. It wasn't mine this time, nor the guttural growl of the figure. It was something else, calm, insistent, almost pitying. Finish what? I asked aloud, my voice trembling. The recorder didn't answer, but the static shifted, morphing into a low hum that filled the room. Then the whispers returned. They weren't chaotic this time. They were measured, purposeful, and they spoke in unison. Close the door. How? I demanded, clutching the edges of the desk. What do I have to do? The whispers faded, replaced by a single voice. Listen. I stared at the recorder, dreading what it would reveal. With trembling hands, I pressed the play button. The static roared, but underneath it was a faint melody, an eerie, disjointed tune that sent chills down my spine. And then, my own voice again, clear and desperate. You opened it. You let it in. The voice paused, and for a moment, there was nothing but the hiss of static. Then, it spoke once more, softer this time. You must seal it. Or it will take everything. I sank into the chair, my mind racing. Seal it? How? The blog hadn't mentioned anything about closing the door, and the shopkeeper had been maddeningly vague. But then I remembered something. The collector wanted voices, whispers, confessions, fears. It fed on them, grew stronger with every word it captured. If it wanted voices, maybe that was the key. I grabbed the recorder and pressed record, my hands trembling so badly I could barely keep hold of it. The red light blinked on, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. I'm done, I said, my voice firm despite the terror coiled in my chest. You can't have me. I'm not giving you any more. The static surged, almost drowning out my words, but I kept going. I'm sealing the door. You have no power here. Leave me. The air around me grew colder, the shadows in the room deepening. I could feel it, something shifting, resisting. The recorder hissed, sputtered, and then clicked off. For a moment, I thought it had worked. The oppressive presence began to fade, and the room grew still. But then the static returned, louder and more violent than ever. You can't stop it, a voice snarled. It wasn't mine. It wasn't human. The lights flickered, and the shadows surged forward, coalescing into the figure. It loomed over me, its form more defined now, tall, skeletal, with hollow, burning eyes. You are the door, it said. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The whispers, the voices, the recordings, they weren't just coming from the recorder. They were coming from me. The figure lunged, and I screamed, clutching the recorder to my chest. Its icy grip closed around my wrist, and the world dissolved into darkness. For a moment, I felt nothing but cold, endless, and consuming. Then, a whisper broke through the void, soft and familiar. Close it. I didn't know if the voice was mine or someone else's, but I obeyed. With the last shred of my strength, I pressed the stop button on the recorder. The static stopped. The shadows evaporated, and the cold lifted. I was back in my apartment, alone. I didn't touch the recorder again. The next morning, I wrapped it in layers of cloth, sealed it in a metal box, and drove miles out of town to bury it in the woods. As I walked away from the makeshift grave, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The air felt lighter, the sun brighter, but a small, nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Had I truly sealed the door? Or had I just passed the burden to someone else? That night, as I lay in bed, the whispers returned. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but they were there. It's not over.